Shalom, and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a Shabbat teaching with Rabbi Tal Sessler.
I'd like to take a moment to introduce our guest speaker for this evening, Rabbi-Dr. Tal Sessler. It's a joy and a pleasure to have a colleague whom I also get to raise children with in this community and celebrate special occasions like his daughter's Bat Mitzvah last year. And Rabbi-Dr. Tal is a rabbi and an author and a psychotherapy provider as well. And he's here to teach us as part of our summer learning series in which we've invited special guests to come and teach us throughout the summer. I'll just mention briefly, last week we had Rabbi Ephraim Pelkovitz. We have a whole lineup that you can see in our summer schedule, but there is an opening on July 4th. So if you have a special topic in mind, or if there's somebody you want to nominate in the community and come and tell me we should really invite them to come and speak, please come and find me because we've got one slot open. With that, I will invite Rabbi Dr. Tal Sessler to come and teach us this afternoon.
Thank you, Rabbi-Cantor, Chorny. So they asked me for a source sheet, but I don't really do that. I have a very idiosyncratic way of teaching Torah. I draw from my first training in philosophy with Torah, and nowadays also some psychological elements. And so I'm going to start and say that before I became a rabbi, I did some work in philosophy. I got my PhD in political thought, and I worked on a couple of books. So when I came to Torah, I came with a philosophical lens. And I noticed that some of the main things, some of the main arguments of leading thinkers in the history of Western thought can already be found in the Torah. So, for example, Aristotle, in his Politics, is famous for saying that man is a social animal, by which he meant that we tend to congregate in groups. And that is reflected in the first statement that God makes to a human in the Torah: it is not good for men to dwell alone. Then you have, for example, Freud spoke about the pleasure principle as the underlying motivation for human life. Isaiah speaks about hedonism. He speaks about those who are in the business of achol v'shato ki machar namut, right? Eat and drink because tomorrow we're not going to be around. Then Marx said that we are really the producing animal, the manufacturing animal, homo faber. We find in Proverbs a similar stance. It says in the Proverbs, Adam le'amal yulad, man was born to toil. Then we have Descartes in the 17th century famously saying, I think, therefore I am, which means I am a mental ideational being. I contemplate, I deliberate, I ponder a dilemma, therefore I am. Rashi says in Genesis 1 that what it means to be in God's image is lehavinu laskil, to be able to understand and to discern. So that's a Cartesian paradigm coming straight from Rashi. And then one of the most popular thinkers of modern European thought, and definitely the greatest atheistic thinker of modern times, was Nietzsche. And Nietzsche spoke about the will to power as the cardinal feature of the human condition. People want to have power over others, dominion over others, aesthetic power, political power, monetary power, social power. People want power over others. So where do we find this in the Torah? In Deuteronomy, it says, stay away from the stance of kochi ve'otzem yadi, my strength and the might of my hands. So why am I starting in this note? Because I think Korach, about whom we read this Shabbat, read too much Nietzsche. I think that he was really into the will to power. You know, to this day, coming from Israel, even secular Israelis say somebody is very, very wealthy we say he is ashir kakorach, he's as wealthy as Korach. That's an idiom in modern-day secular Israel to this day. So Korach was into the will to power. He was a billionaire in today's sense, in today's terms. And he also wanted to be the high priest. He did not suffice himself being a Levi. And speaking of the will to power, Rabbi Sachs used to say that Judaism is the antithesis of Nietzsche's approach. Because if Nietzsche's approach was about the will to power, Judaism is about the power of ideas. For example, the idea that we're all equal before God. And then we have the business of Korach's sons, and that's what I want to talk about briefly for a few minutes. Korach's sons did not perish. So the Midrash says that Korach's sons lo metu, they didn't die, and they actually made a proclamation. They had a rude awakening, and they said, Moshe emet v'torato emet. Moses is truth, and Moses' Torah is truth. And Korach's sons not only made tshuva, if you like, but they immortalized themselves. To this day, we read their writings. Anybody knows where we read their writings? Except the Rabbi-Cantor? In the? Right, that's a three-pointer right there. Nothing but net. Right, Psalm 49. Psalm 49 is attributed in the tradition to the sons of Korach. And where do we read Psalm 49? When do we read it? We read it in a shiva home, twice. In the morning, and in Shacharit, and between Mincha and Mariv. Sorry, did you want to say something?
For Monday, mentions Psalm to clan of Korach.
That too, right. I'm focusing on Psalm 49, but you're right. There are different psalms that are attributed to the sons of Korach. There are several. Every day. Interesting. Which Sephardic custom is that? Syrian. Okay, so the Syrian custom, not every Sephardic, for example, the Turkish do not, but I understand the Syrian and the Moroccan custom is to read it every day before afternoon service. Thank you. Thank you for teaching me. So, all of us. So this makes it even more instructive. So in the Ashkenazi world, the sons of Korach have such seminal things to tell us about the Jewish condition and the human condition that we read them in a shiva home twice daily. And as, what is your name, sir? As Yoni just taught me and us as well, in the Syrian and Moroccan tradition, we read that Psalm 49 daily. So what's going on in this Psalm? So I actually wrote my own very literal, non-literal translation of this Psalm. This Psalm by the sons of Korach basically is a universal Psalm. And it says, listen, all mortals. So it's addressed not only to the Jewish people, but to all human beings. And then it talks about socioeconomic disparities. It says rich and poor alike. So irrespective of your socioeconomic background, they say, the sons of Korach say, my mouth shall utter words of wisdom, and I shall speak in parable. And then they go and criticize their father's approach to life. Who did we say that Korach read too much of? Nietzsche. And what was Nietzsche about? The will to power. So who do they criticize, the sons of Korach? Those who rely on their assets and boast of their wealth. That's what we read in a shiva home and in the Syrian and Moroccan community every afternoon. Those who rely on their power, on their assets, and boast of their wealth. They forget that no man can redeem a fellow human being from death. And they go on to say, we see that the wise perish alongside the ignorant, and they leave to others their assets. They go on to say, and that's my translation, when affluent people are around, they name their estates after themselves. Yet in the final analysis, man perishes and dies just like the wild beast of the field. So that's a very powerful critique of the will to power, right? And of their father's lifetime enterprise was to accumulate more and more worldly power. And here the sons of Korach are actually telling us, Dad was off the mark. Life is not about worldly power. And then they go on to say, fear not when a man becomes rich and when his family name becomes reputable, for when he dies he takes nothing with him. Therefore let him be a soulful blessing in his lifetime, so that he would be good, and that would be good for him. And they conclude with the words in Hebrew, Nimshal ka behemot nidmu, which means a person who understands this not is akin to an animal in the field. So a very powerful psalm that's basically telling us that we spend the bulk of our time earning a living and trying to provide for ourselves. But what they're saying is they're basically going the opposite way of their father, right? Their father said, the more you invest yourself in worldly things, the more you actualize yourselves. And they're saying that that's a fairly relative endeavor. So it really talks about, it brings to mind David Brooks, the New York Times columnist and writer, writes in his book, The World to Character, that we basically have two kinds of virtues in life. One type of virtues is the resume virtues. Went to this school, worked in that company, right? And the other kind of virtues is the eulogy virtues, the kind of things that people say about us when we leave this world. And I think the difference between the Korach approach and Korach's son's approach, which is the antithesis of their father, is that Korach lived for the resume virtues, and Korach's sons are saying focus on the eulogy virtues, focus on your legacy. And there's a push and pull, I think, in the Jewish tradition between our desire to invest in worldly things and, on the one hand, our realization that we're merely passing through this world. And one of the ways we see it is in Parshat Bereshit Noach Lecha Ve'erach. Which one is Chayei Sarah? Parshat Chayei Sarah. In Parshat Chayei Sarah, Abraham is described as a prince of God in the midst of the Hittites, and he says to them, "I am a stranger and a resident within you," which is a bit of a misnomer, right? What does it mean, I'm a stranger and a resident amongst you? And Rabbi Soloveitchik says it's the duality of the human condition. On the one hand, we reside in this world, we invest ourselves in this world, we raise families, we build careers, but on the other hand, we are strangers in this world. We're merely passing through this world, right? And that's the duality and the tension between the Korach approach and the approach of his children. His children emphasize the transient nature of human existence, and Korach was fully invested in this world. There is a famous teaching by the Chafetz Chaim, the great rabbi before the Holocaust in Poland, that a group of wealthy American philanthropists came to his town, and they wanted to meet with the legendary rabbi, and a couple of them who gave a lot to the community were invited to the rabbi's home. And when they came to the rabbi's home, they were kind of shell-shocked. All they saw was one table, which the rabbi ate and studied Torah, and some bookshelves and a bed, and that was pretty much it. So one of the Americans couldn't help himself, and he said, "Rabbi, where's all your stuff?" And the rabbi looked at him and said, "Where's all your stuff?" And the American says, "Me, I'm just passing through here." So the rabbi told him, "Me too, I'm also just passing through here." And I think that's really what the sons of Korach are trying to tell us. That in the words of Abraham too, we are but strangers and residents in this world, and we're all just passing through here. The last thing I would say about this is, I'll say two more things. One is that Rabbi Sachs, in his book, Essays in Leadership, for this week's Torah portion, he distinguishes between power and influence. So Korach was into power. But Judaism is not into power. Judaism is into influence. We read in the Haftarah today that the people came to the prophet Samuel and said, we want a king. But it wasn't really the plan for us to have monarchs, right? So what's the difference between power and influence? So there was a great Christian theologian, Kierkegaard, who said, when a king dies, his reign ends. When a prophet dies, their legacy begins. Now walk down the street and ask most people, have you heard about Isaiah and Jeremiah and Jonah? Most people will say yes. And then ask them, who was king in the days of Elijah? Most people will not know, right? And that's the difference between power and influence, right? So we want influence in life rather than power. And also Rabbi Sachs used to say, who was the most influential man, the most impactful person who ever lived? Who would you say? Moshe, okay. Anyone else? Aaron? Miriam? So Rabbi Sachs said... Right, so that's what Rabbi Sachs says. He says Abraham was the most impactful human being who ever lived. He led no army. He held no political office. He had no authority. But today, billions of people around the world purport to be his spiritual followers and heirs. So what we want to have is influence rather than power. And I think it really highlights itself when it comes to parenting. So I was actually the last rabbi to invite Rabbi Sachs to come and speak in Los Angeles 6 weeks before COVID and 10 months before he passed away. And I asked him in a Q&A, what does he have to say about parenting? And he said that the way we want to parent is we want to parent like Abraham rather than Noah. And with Noah, it says, Eta Elohim italech Noach. Noach kind of followed God. Whereas God says to Abraham, Italech lefanai veheye tamim. Walk before me, you lead the way. And he actually said that's the way we want to educate our children. We want to educate our children to discover their own voice in life. We lead by example, we want to inspire them, but ultimately we cannot control them. And if we try to exert too much power over them, then they will end up rebelling. Or they will end up having some sort of a dull conformity, thoughtless conformity. So he said, the best thing you want to, the way to parent is the way of influence rather than power. And the Jewish approach to what Nietzsche called the will to power is the way of influence rather than power. And to conclude, I thought about this. Korach's sons went completely against their dad's way in life, right? The antithetical philosophy of life, right? And similarly, Abraham and Moses, right? Abraham went exactly against his father's legacy, right? His father had a chain of stores called Idols Are Us, right? And Abraham went the complete opposite way. And Moses grew up in the tyrant's palace, and he went a different way. There's a beautiful psychoanalytic reading that when Moses killed the Egyptian officer and buried him, he also buried his own Egyptianness, right? So I think that one message we can take from the sons of Korach and from Abraham and Moses, the two most important figures in the Torah, maybe in all of Jewish textuality and Jewish history, is that we should not be a passive reflection of our socialization. In other words, that I think our tradition challenges us to carve out an autonomous path in life. Not to say, Mom and Dad do this, I'm going to do that. But to think for ourselves, to ask questions, as another Israeli theologian, Yeshaya Leibovich, used to say, the antithesis of the wise one in the Haggadah is not, God forbid, the stupid child. We don't have a stupid child. We have the one who does not pose questions, right? So, posing questions and carving our own path in life. That was the path of Abraham, that was the path of Moses, and that's the path of the sons of Korach. So these are some thoughts about the sons of Korach, the way they negated their father's legacy, the fact that they told us to focus on not on worldly and transient things, but really on our legacy and how it's also reflected in the lives of Abraham and Moses.
You've been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast website or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information on Temple Beth Am, Los Angeles, please visit www.tbala.org.